Well, Steve Witkoff said that the U.S. position is that they would want Iran to eliminate its enrichment program, which would effectively move the U.S. back to the zero enrichment position of the Bush administration and the early Obama administration. But he also said that this is not a red line for them. So Iran and the U.S., when they met in Oman and then in Rome, essentially seemed to agree that Iran will be allowed limited enrichment under essentially the same framework of the JCPOA. Now, talks are still in very early stage, but this is a positive development. It shows flexibility on the part of the United States. Iran also has to show flexibility on certain issues like, for example, potentially shipping out some of the highly enriched uranium that it's accumulated, which was something that was part of the JCPOA, the original Iran nuclear deal from 2015 as well. So this is what's propelled the talks forward, is that both sides seem pretty flexible on these sort of major bullet point items. But of course, there's going to be a lot of devil in the details, and that's why these technical talks are really important as they start on Wednesday.
Ali, I interviewed the U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright in the last couple of days during his visit to the Middle East. He also said the U.S. is essentially reviving talks to help Saudi Arabia develop a civilian nuclear program. And I want your take on that as well. Is that a leverage point that is also influencing these talks with Iran?
It's become a very interesting and potentially positive dimension for the talks. Saudi Arabia has obviously been trying to work on a nuclear program for some time. It wants enrichment technology from the United States. Now, this is the same enrichment technology that the U.S. said is so dangerous Iran could never have it, and this is why it took all the way to 2015 from 2003 for us to get to that original nuclear agreement. And the U.S. left the agreement obviously in 2018, citing in part that Iran still had an enrichment program. So Saudi Arabia having an enrichment program is certainly against long-standing U.S. policy about what kind of aid they're allowed to provide for the nuclear programs of other countries. Iran would have also historically taken a negative perception of that, said if Saudi Arabia wants to enrich, they should agree to the same limitations about how much you're enriching. But the Iran-Saudi relationship has really developed rather well. The two countries have a pretty good relationship at this point. The Saudi defense minister was in Tehran. He had met with the Supreme Leader, which was a historic development, frankly. The Supreme Leader has a very restrictive policy about who he meets with directly. And so the idea that Saudi Arabia and the UAE could potentially play a somewhat positive role in this, perhaps by buying some of Iran's enriched uranium that Iran needs to ship out, or even civil cooperation between Iran and Saudi Arabia on the nuclear front, has emerged as this kind of intriguing idea that certainly wouldn't have been on the table anywhere in 2015, but could perhaps help not just move the nuclear agreement along, but even serve as an avenue of cooperation for Iran and Saudi Arabia that sort of desperately need that to maintain the positive trajectory in their relationship.
And Ali, that's what makes these talks so fascinating. I think you've explained it really, really well. A decade ago, the Iranians would have probably seen any kind of Saudi nuclear program as a double standard that would be a red line and certainly unacceptable. Now, in the Trump era, there's talk about potential progress on both fronts and scope for even negotiations themselves. So this is so interesting to watch. Ali, the other interesting angle here is that Iran has also asked for guarantees, or at least some kind of certainty, that the US isn't going to walk away from another deal. What's your take on how the Trump administration can navigate this? And just given the US political cycle, is that even realistic?
Well, I mean, the short answer is basically no. The United States, because of the nature of its government, because of the level of executive power in the field of foreign policy, doesn't really have a mechanism by which it can guarantee that it's going to stick to the agreement. Even if it was the form of some kind of treaty that was ratified by a two-thirds majority of the Senate, The Constitution says that you need that two-thirds majority to ratify a treaty. It's silent on how you exit it. And so the American president can and has in the past left a treaty without congressional approval. So even with treaties, this can happen. The thought is that perhaps if there is, say, a one-year period of withdrawal baked into some sort of agreement that is binding somehow on the president, where the president needs to give 1 year advance, perhaps that can have an effect. But for the most part, this isn't a realistic option. Certainly, considering the political circumstances in Congress right now, Iran has a very developed nuclear program in this sense of its technological development in this field, especially over the last number of years, as Iran has left its obligations under the JCPOA. Its technology has improved dramatically, and as far as many in Iran have said, this should be the Iranian guarantee is that Iran is so technologically advanced it can ramp up its nuclear program right back to basically where it is now within a short amount of time. So that's sort of the debate on that front, and it's not clear that any kind of guarantee is possible on the American side.
Indeed, and that's what has the hawks in the Trump administration and Israel so concerned about these negotiations as well. I wanted to get your take on this too, because there have been growing voices for military strikes on Iran if these diplomatic efforts fail. Is that also a possibility still?
I mean, there's a reason the Bush administration didn't do this, the Obama administration didn't do this, the first Trump administration didn't do this. The U.S. doesn't really have very good military options when you're talking about is potentially a major war in the Middle East, because it certainly wouldn't be possible at all through limited strikes. You would need a significant military operation that could last weeks. Of course, Iran would be retaliating against U.S. forces in the region and elsewhere. So, and the likely possibility is limited damage that sets back Iran's nuclear program just a few years. And these are the options the United States has. Certainly Israel has, its options are far, far more limited. Its operational capacity to work across the Middle East as far as Iran is much more limited. So the military option isn't really one that is viable here. Eventually, there's going to need to be some sort of diplomatic solution. This kind of saber rattling on the part of the United States is certainly not new. The Obama administration did very many of the same things with talk about how all options are on the table, which they would repeatedly say. Strangely enough, under this Trump administration, it might actually be less offensive to Iran in certain ways, because Donald Trump is threatening military action against so many different people, against trying to annex Canada or Greenland and whatnot. But it is something that's sort of baked in. I don't really see a military option as being viable, and I think the Americans know that. But both for domestic political reasons and for the idea of leverage at the negotiating table, they still feel the need to issue these threats.